Hello and welcome to Gareth Icke Tonight. Are you still talking about this Epstein dude? That creep? Come on. US President Donald Trump doesn't understand why the Epstein files would be of interest to anyone, and he thinks that only pretty bad people want to keep the conversation going. By the way, it wasn't lost on me that as Trump made that absolutely insane and wildly inaccurate statement, he was standing next to Jeffrey Epstein's former next-door neighbor, Howard Lutnick. I'm sure that's just one of a very long string of coincidences that connect Donald and his associates with the Epstein sex trafficking and blackmail operation. So let's pick apart that statement. Only bad people want to pursue the Epstein files. Interesting. I must be a pretty bad person then, Donald, because the list of names of people that raped and abused children and young women provided by Jeffrey Epstein is a pretty big deal. Do you want to know why? Well, multiple reasons. One, because they're demonic maggots that belong in a freezing jail cell for the remainder of their despicable existence within this mortal realm. Now, I'm sure many of you think that they're deserving of far worse, but personally, I try and stop short of wishing physical harm and death upon others, no matter how persuasive the temptation may be at times. Two, perhaps more importantly, because rapists and paedophiles don't suddenly cease to be rapists and paedophiles. They don't suddenly become stand-up members of society because the person who previously provided them with trafficked girls has either died or gone to prison. That twisted fetish for sex with kids doesn't simply go away because you need to make some phone calls. They just locate another source of victims, and with the astronomical number of kids that go missing every year across the West, there's no shortage of supply. The devil doesn't cease to be the devil just because he gets a new assistant. And so releasing the names and arresting those who committed these crimes is as much about protecting the kids of the future as it is about seeking justice for those in the past. Three, the names on that list are all compromised individuals who, because of Epstein's camera in every room policy, have compromat against them that will absolutely leave them wide open for blackmail in order to manipulate their decision-making and policy implementation. Decision-making that affects every single one of us. And never in a positive way, because if you need to use child abuse compromat to make someone do something, it probably isn't going to be the right thing, is it? Now, whether the compromised are politicians, leaders of media, industry, or whatever, the people deserve to know who they are. The people deserve to know who works for the people and in the interests of the people, and who works for the blackmailers and in the interests of their own sordid self-preservation. And do you know why else the people deserve to see who's on that Epstein client list? Because you told them you'd release it, Donald. Just like you said no more foreign wars and that you'd end the Ukraine-Russia conflict in 24 hours. It was a selling point of your campaign for president. You even had your weird trophy-hunting son out there shouting about it at many of your cult rallies. And yet now, the Epstein files that are in a ring binder in the hands of your on-the-payroll influencers, they're on Pam Bondi's desk, they don't actually exist, and they're a fabrication by Barack Obama all at the same time, are suddenly now of no interest to anyone but the really bad. Sorry, Donald, it's not going to fly, lad. Not with the MAGA base, not with the wider public, the world over. It seems the only people it is flying with are Trump's tight circle of online influencers whose whole algorithmic elevation and therefore financial structure is built upon promoting him, and more often than not these days, defending the indefensible on his behalf. They'll sit straight-faced and say they don't care about the Epstein files anymore because they trust Donald Trump. They trust their friends in government. They trust the plan. And they urge their ever less gullible followers to do the same. And do you know what trust the plan really means, folks? In layman's terms, it means shh, shut up now, hush your mouth, pipe down. However you want to say it, that's what it means. It means don't do anything yourself. Don't be proactive, don't get organized, and don't rise up against the deep state en masse because we've got someone who'll do it for you. You just sit down, you buy some MAGA merchandise, and you leave it to us. It just so happens that the savior has been provided for the masses, and he himself is up to his neck in the deep state. Now, while not the biggest gator in the swamp, he's certainly a swamp dweller nonetheless. And more people are now realizing this. And so this is a crucial time for all of us, because as the deception starts to wane and the people start to step back into the camp of, oh mate, these politicians are all in it together, aren't they? There is a very real opportunity for unity. We can start calling out all politicians on all sides for their actions and not just attacking one side while ignoring the actions of the other because of some blind tribal loyalty. There should be no loyalty to any political party from any of us because they've got no loyalty to us. Every single one of these goblins would sell you and your family down the river in a heartbeat if they had a heart, and they frequently do, either for financial gain, career elevation, or to stop the compromat against them seeing the light of day. So why be loyal to these kind of people and these kind of institutions? But as people wake from their trance of Trump derangement syndrome, which is ironically an ailment that's leveled at people that had previously seen the Trump that you're now starting to witness, the establishment will seek desperately to put a lid on the seeing. Expect distractions aplenty in the coming weeks and months, whether escalations with Russia, Iran, China, terrorist attacks, not so natural disasters, or even some kind of fake illness outbreak, if the cult doesn't feel like they can cap the damage being done by the Epstein scandal. They will seek to take our eyes off it by any means possible, and we mustn't let that happen. And by the way, if they don't feel like they can save brand Trump, they're not beyond throwing Donald under the bus too, because while serial narcissists might play the role of the all-powerful president and the all-powerful prime minister, they're only really front men and women for those that truly pull the strings, and we used to know that. Coming up on the show, broadcaster and political commentator Basil Valentine gives us an update on the current situation in the Middle East. And independent journalist and activist Taylor Hudak is here to talk about the prosecution of Robert Ver, an early Bitcoin investor whom it's claimed is being persecuted for political reasons. But first, Jim Ferguson is a British businessman, entrepreneur, farmer, and political activist. He's known for his anti-globalist stance and advocacy for national sovereignty. Jim has been reporting live from the Netherlands, where the likes of Bill Gates, Ursula von der Leyen, Albert Bourla, and others have all been named accused of conspiracy, bioterrorism, and crimes against humanity. Now, Jim joins us now. Jim, you've been reporting from the Netherlands. Can you tell us about this case for those people that aren't familiar with it? Who has brought this to court and who is the case specifically against?
Well, I actually was aware of this about 10 months ago, and I did report on it then. But of course, it's moved on since then. So there are 7 families who are being now represented with top lawyers, including Arno van Kessel, and the lead lawyer in this case. But what's interesting is that the defendants have all sent lawyers to hear and to try to counter the narrative, with the exception of Bill Gates. So the principal people that are being accused of these very, very serious accusations are Bill Gates. We're looking at Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, Mark Rutte, the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands and who's now heading up NATO, and others. And it's very significant because when I got to the court, I decided to go and cover the story. When I got to the court, there were hundreds of people outside, hundreds of people inside. And I had already made arrangements with a lawyer in the Netherlands to get access to the court, and I was able to do that. So very, very significant developments.
What powers will this court actually have in terms of arresting those, say for instance, they're found guilty. I'm thinking of, the ICC putting out arrest warrants for Putin, for Netanyahu, nothing happens. What power will this court have should the judge rule in the favour of these families?
Well, I think what's very significant about this court case is the actual wording that was being said. So I was given special access. I sat inside the court and I listened to what was being said and heard some of the evidence that was being presented, obviously in a preliminary fashion. But what is very significant is that the court case is going ahead. Now, Arno van Kessel, about 4 weeks ago, was arrested at his home This is the lead lawyer. He was blindfolded. He was handcuffed. He was taken to a maximum security prison in the Netherlands, where he's still being detained without charge. These were units of police that arrived there. They were armed. And this is looking more and more like an attempt by the globalist elites to intimidate and to stop the court case from going ahead. So it's very, very significant. But Peter Stadsel, one of his colleagues, was able to get the court papers to the court and, of course, presented it to the judge. And that's why this is now so significant. What powers they have? Well, they are a judicial court. They are a sitting judge. And, of course, what they said was that they were going to make a judgment in about 6 weeks' time on the 9th of July. So what has been happening now is that we're waiting to see what that judgment will be, whether they proceed, whether they may, in fact, instruct those defendants like Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, and others to actually attend the court. Can you imagine how significant that would be if they were put on trial effectively on the witness stand? It would be massive. And the lying mainstream media would no longer be able to hide this because they're not reporting on it at all. It's just independent free media like us who are covering this case, but it's greatly significant.
That doesn't surprise me. That's what I was going to ask you next, actually, Jim, was has the Dutch media been covering it? But obviously, I didn't expect them to be honest. It is hugely significant though, isn't it? I mean, should the judge rule that they have to attend court, I mean, that, like you said, you wouldn't be able to bury that. And that would sort of start a snowball effect almost, wouldn't it? Is there a genuine hope then that arrests will follow this? What I mean by that is obviously I understand sometimes doing things, even sometimes like major protests or something. You do a major protest and you think, well, it's not going to change policy, but it's the statement of doing it. It's being seen to stand up and say no and whatever. Is part of this about just making a point, or do these 7 families think, well, no, hang on, actually, we've got a real genuine chance here of pushing this further?
Yeah, no, they absolutely do. I mean, for example, when I attended the court and I set up the camera because the police actually had locked the door. I think they were frightened of the huge number of people that were there. I mean, must have been 500 or 600 people crammed around the entrance. So I went there, I set up my camera. Some people came up to ask who I was. I told them who I was. Some of them had heard of me and they started to talk to me. I interviewed some of the people there. And I had already made arrangements to get access to the court, but the police wouldn't come to the door. So I couldn't show them my press pass. I couldn't show them my identification because they wouldn't come near the door. So when they realized who I was, they started to chant Jim in. There was hundreds of people chanting, "Let Jim in." So eventually I got round a side door. I met the lawyer, a lawyer called Maaike ter Horst. She's a friend. I've known her for several years now in my travels back and forth to the Netherlands. We were in Geneva together, presenting court papers to the World Health Organization. So I know her quite well. And these families absolutely believe that in the legal justice system. And they believe because they've presented so much evidence, I think close to 150, 160 pieces of detailed evidence. And there are also professional witnesses who have been called to give evidence at the appropriate time, including Sasha Latapova, a pharma executive, former, and the likes of others like her and those involved in that process. So there is a huge amount of anticipation building to this. When I spoke to people outside the court, once we'd heard the preliminary evidence, it became very, very clear that there is absolute expectation that the judge will do the right thing. And I asked, what like is this person? The commentary was from other solicitors I spoke to, other lawyers I spoke to, was that he's quite fair-minded. They're quite fair-minded. They're not going to cover up anything, let's put it that way. And I think that was always the big worry, that they might try to do that. But in actual fact, there is a real expectation, not just in the Netherlands, that justice will be done, but this is affecting people all around the world, especially in the highly vaccinated countries, where they were all subjected to psychological operations with the collusion of mainstream media. This, I've said this before, and I will say it again, this could lead to a new Nuremberg trial, because the accusations are genocide, crimes against humanity, the use of biological weapons and psychological operations to coerce, intimidate, and force people into getting these experimental mRNA shots. It couldn't be more significant. And there's so many people reaching out to me at the moment asking for further details, because I think there is going to be further court cases appearing with these individuals and probably others in due course.
I think, to be honest, mate, I think if this judge rules in the favour of the 7 families, you will see so many people in different countries use that as a precedent and say, hang on a minute, let's do this. Is there a fear that, because obviously the people that are named, your Gates, your Ballers and Ursula von der Leyens and all these kind of people, money's no object, whether it's theirs or someone else's. Is there a fear that maybe they can try and use the justice system to just kind of almost just keep appealing and more fees and more this and that? Or is that not how it works in the Netherlands?
Oh, well, it's a similar process to any court of law. I mean, there are technical differences and different aspects of that. But I think no matter how much money they've got, if they start to get put on trial, it doesn't matter what they've got. There are also millions, potentially billions of people around the world who are very wealthy. They're business people. Their loved ones were injured. Some of them died. You might find that the balance, the restoration of, in terms of equal accountability, will come in the form of donations to people that want to bring these kind of court cases to bear. I think they're in trouble. The globalists are definitely in trouble. The mask has slipped. They're now being exposed for what they've done, and the evidence is there to be analysed. And once those lawyers start to get into that, it's going to be game over for them. I mean, one of the lawyers, I call them solicitors in the UK, one of the lawyers that was representing the people that are sort of being defendants, said, but the evidence all says that the vaccines were safe and effective. And there was a very strong counter to that. They said, well, your experts might say that, but there are other experts around the world who have a different opinion. Why should we just believe your experts? So really, this could be something that effectively blows the doors off of the whole safe and effective narrative. And there's other people in other countries, like the former British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who invested $500 billion of his own money into Moderna in 2017 through Theleme Partners, a hedge fund that he set up in the Cayman Islands, a notorious tax haven, long before the pandemic, into Moderna, who at that point had never had a successful product to market. Why would he invest a huge sum of money, $500 million, into a company that had no successful products to market? What did he know? And then he went and used taxpayers' money when he was Prime Minister to give further contracts to Moderna worth many billions of pounds. So there's a lot of speculation that many other people, including in the United Kingdom, might be put on trial or summoned to court or summoned to give evidence as to why they did what they did. And there's a real expectation building. And I'm very much watching this closely, reporting on it, and happy to be on with you. And thank you to your father, David, as well, for reposting and recovering all of this. It's great to see that partnership happening all across the world, and there is a huge international focus starting to bear down on this. So let's hope that justice will prevail.
Absolutely, mate. And hopefully this is going to bring people together as well. Because I think, I don't know about you, but, during that COVID time when we basically had a quite clear enemy, that was against all of us, no matter what differences we may have politically or religiously or whatever, we sort of came together, didn't we, everyone? And it was, whilst it was a horrific time for lots of different reasons, there was also this unity that was actually quite special. That's since been blown apart and the divisions have come back to bear, unfortunately. This might just bring people back together again, and hopefully it does. Where can people keep up with what you're doing, Jim? Because I understand a lot of what you're doing is on X, but is there anywhere else where people watching this can learn more about the case, of the finer details, perhaps?
Well, they can go to freedomtraininternational.org. That's the website for Freedom Train. It is the fastest and largest growing freedom movement in the world, which was started launched in February 2024. So we teach people how to get ready, how to get prepared. And there's a lot of intel on there about what people can expect the globalists to do next. So you can follow us there. And also on X at Jim Ferguson UK. And just to say also that what you're talking about in terms of unity is incredibly important. I've been in multiple countries over the course of the last 2 to 3 months. I've been in Romania. I've been in Budapest, I've been in Paris, France, obviously the Netherlands, Ireland, I've been all over. And there is a unity building within patriots all around the world because unity is strength. We are coming together. We need to unite across Europe. We need to unite the patriots in every country to work together, because what the globalists did just a few short years ago was declare war on humanity. And it's time that we all understood that collectively we have a chance to fight back and push back and get the truth out and let justice prevail. And I believe it will prevail and it will be done.
I sincerely hope you're right, Jim. Thanks so much for joining us, mate. And I'll look forward to keeping up with your commentary and more information as it comes out. Hopefully also for the lawyer who's in prison at the moment, hopefully that can be resolved swiftly as well.
Thank you very much indeed. An absolute pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to interviewing him quite soon. So watch this space. Stay tuned.
Magic. Cheers, Jim. Thanks, mate. Basil Valentine is a broadcaster, a political commentator, specialising in geopolitics. He's also a regular contributor to Patrick Henningson's 21st Century Wire. Basil joins us to discuss the ongoing situation in the Middle East. Basil, thank you so much for joining us. What's the current situation in Gaza? Because we're seeing these harrowing reports of starving people being shot at aid distribution centres. It's beyond horrific. You've got Israelis saying, oh, it's Hamas, but do you know what I mean? They say Hamas did everything. So what is actually going on?
Thanks, Gareth. Great to be with you. It's a hellscape. It's the most dystopian vision you could possibly imagine of people living on rubble in tents, on quite literally the shattered bones of their relatives. It's unimaginable horror. People are dying of thirst, dying of starvation, thousands of amputees, a real depth of suffering that is often not mentioned or ignored by the media. That's the key thing to remember. I mean, Israeli lawmakers have made it very obvious that they want to create suffering for the people of Gaza, for the Palestinians. A pain worse than death, said one Israeli lawmaker. Others in the Israeli parliament have said recently that there must not be a single living Palestinian in Gaza when they've finished. And that's what they're going about doing. It's an extermination zone. Nobody is safe anywhere at any time of day or night. It's getting unbelievably hot in that part of the world at the moment. Israel has stated its policy of deliberately targeting all fresh water supplies. So this genocide is multifaceted. It's bombing from the air. It's shooting people with drones. And there's an element of really sadistic cruelty to it, Gareth, which we have to mention. Doctors, those that are still alive, of course, because doctors and medical staff have been particularly targeted by the Israeli forces, are reporting that it appears Israeli snipers are shooting different body parts for fun, including shooting teenage boys in the testicles. So we're dealing with a horror that if you depicted it in a film, people would say, no, I cannot believe that any group of people would be as cruel as this to another group of people. We're nearly 2 years into this genocide now. It's worth remembering that it was in January 2024 that the International Criminal Court first came to the conclusion that there was a plausible case for genocide. From that point onwards, all signatories to the Genocide Convention and the Geneva Conventions are obliged to do everything they can to stop the genocide. That, of course, has not been happening. The British government have been continuing to provide diplomatic cover and allowing the export of weapons and parts for fighter planes to Israel, continuing to provide diplomatic cover. Even now, all we hear are milquetoast statements from ministers about how this is unacceptable, but they don't actually do anything about it. It isn't unacceptable if you accept it. So, it's a total nightmare. It should be the only story on the front page of every newspaper in the world every day. That's the scale of the horror. Imagine for a moment that the cities of Leeds and Manchester had been reduced to just rubble, and the citizens of Leeds and Manchester were living on tents on the rubble of their homes, being regularly shelled, starved to death, and deprived of water. We wouldn't be talking about anything else. I mean, would be regarded as the Armageddon, you know.
Yeah.
Imagine for a moment it was Tel Aviv that had been reduced to rubble. You would hear the howls all the way from here to Washington and back. But because it's Gaza and because of the systematic demonization and dehumanization of the Palestinian people, somehow this is brushed under the carpet, ignored. A lot of people who do pay close attention find it too horrific to think about, to focus on. People find it very depressing. How can I look at this? This is nothing I can do about this. This is so horrific. It damages my emotional state. And that's quite understandable. But unfortunately, we do have to look at it and we have to call it out for what it is, which is sheer evil, Gareth.
I agree. Where did Israel go from here? Because I understand, Basil, I get their long-term objective, which is the land. Let's have it right. They want Gaza, they want the West Bank, they want the whole lot for themselves. They want no living Palestinian left, as you say. But in terms of a PR exercise, for me, I've been talking up for Palestinians for a long time, for a decade and more. And there's a very strong PR when it comes to Israel, that they attack, they invert reality to make them the victim when they're absolutely not in that current situation. That's not worked this time. So I'm thinking, Basil, even if they take all the land and they get rid of the Palestinians, in terms of the eyes of the public around the world, how does Israel go back to being another nation, a democracy in the Middle East? Because I feel like that ship sailed in a way.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I don't think it does, certainly not in the hearts and minds of all right-thinking people, anybody with an ounce of empathy or anybody who wishes to see the maintenance of international law, which lies in ruins at the moment. No, globally, Israel will be forever a pariah state. Now, of course, it's got its blackmail operations. It's got its bribery operations through AIPAC and Israel lobbyists in the UK who pay off our politicians. It's got still organs like the Daily Telegraph and the BBC working assiduously on its behalf. But even that's not enough because, of course, opinion these days is formed on social media and elsewhere. People can see for themselves what's going on, and they can hear for themselves the genocidal statements of Israeli lawmakers. I mean, they've been very open about the fact they want to commit genocide. If you look at what's said in the Israeli press, it's much more honest than what we see in the West. And yes, its image is forever tarnished. Now, I'm pleased to say that just yesterday and today, there is a gathering of 30 countries originally based on the Hague group of countries who are determined to start pressing the international community to uphold international law and to do what they can to end the occupation, which is itself illegal. I mean, let's not forget that, that the West Bank and Gaza Strip are in no way Israel's possession. They'd like to have them, but they're not theirs in international law. China and Ireland are among the countries that have sent delegates to this conference in Bogota, which is going on as we speak. And of course, the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement only ever gathers pace, so much so that the British government felt threatened enough to ban the most vociferous and effective Palestine Solidarity Organization, the one whose name we can't mention, Gareth, because we now live in a dystopic kind of elected fascist dictatorship.
Oh yeah, I couldn't possibly say that I supported Palestine Action, because if I did, I'd get in all kinds of trouble. What is your
I've
take?
seen an amusing meme online. I think we can say this: I support Palestine. Action must be taken.
That pause changes everything, mate. The pause changes everything. What's your take on like the MAGA movement? Because I know obviously you're an expert in geopolitics. Obviously you've got an opinion in terms of the US as well. It started off, so we're told, as an America First movement. It's very quickly become basically a pro-Israel movement. Do you think that's perhaps what it was always designed to be?
Well, no. I mean, it was designed as a sort of genuine, populist movement against the sort of globalism and the wokery and indeed the general deterioration in the standards of American public life. I was watching an American film from the mid 1950s last night, and everything from the way people spoke to the way society was organized in the United States in the 1950s was a more optimistic, more life affirming. There were much lower crime rates. It was an altogether more civilized country. I mean, it's as simple as that. America has gone downhill. We all see that now. Streets full of fentanyl-addled zombies, a national debt of $34 trillion. Hundreds of military bases all around the world. What for? America's not supposed to have an empire. That was what the founding fathers wanted. But MAGA itself has now split very clearly between the genuine American firsters, led by the likes of Tucker Carlson and the Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who want to see an end to foreign wars, and what's more, have woken up to the fact that the Trump administration is not America first, it's Israel first. And they're starting to say, how come, what's going on here? There's a lot of noticing being going on that a lot of American politicians seem to prioritize the interests of the state of Israel over America itself. Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, when dozens of people were being killed by the floods in his home state, he was far too busy to talk about that. He, of course, was meeting Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington. So MAGA has now split. Most people are, without a shadow of a doubt, in the Tucker Carlson, Dave Smith, Marjorie Taylor Greene. There was a turning point meeting just at the weekend, which is Charlie Kirk's, the real heart of America First, patriotic, so-called right-wing policy forum. And Tucker got a rousing cheer when he said that if you served in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, you should have your citizenship revoked. And Dave Smith was equally pungent in his criticism of Israel and got a lot of support for it. So MAGA is very confused. But what's interesting, of course, is that it's got a lot in common with the changes in opinion towards Israel among Democrats as well. Now, if you go back 5 years or so, an overwhelming majority of Democrat voters and supporters said that they took Israel's side in that conflict. And the same poll conducted a couple of weeks ago showed that that had completely flipped. And the vast majority of Democrats now support the Palestinian cause. This, in spite, of course, of the wall-to-wall pro-Israel coverage on all their networks. I mean, you can't find a genuine Palestinian voice on any of the major American networks, but fortunately that can now be circumvented by social media. So we could well see a political realignment in the United States, basically between, as our late great friend Ian Crane said, humanity and insanity. There are supporters of humanity and all that's right and good about life and our planet in both the Republican and Democratic parties. And more they are aware of the fact that their government has been completely hijacked by Israel, and that unless they do something about it, they're going downhill fast.
Where do you see this ending? Just finally, Basil, I know I'm asking you for a crystal ball, a crystal ball answer, but in terms of Iran, for me, I just think that this whole pause in fighting is basically just Israel being able to rearm itself, because I think they took more of a hit than they expected from Iran. But where do you see this going, say, in the next 2 or 3 years? Because as you say, it's been nearly 2 years since this genocide in Gaza, and it is a genocide, has been going on. Surely it can't be going on for another 2 years. I mean, maybe I'm being optimistic, but surely something has to happen.
Well, absolutely. The special rapporteur to the United Nations on the occupied territories, Francesca Albanese, a heroic figure, she addressed the conference in Bogota yesterday and said now is the time to isolate Israel completely. I mean, it's ludicrous in a way that we still have an Israeli ambassador in Britain and that she's, interviewed on television as if she was a normal person. Of course, it's absolutely disgraceful that the likes of David Lammy are seen holding hands with mass murderers like Israel Katz and the Israeli president. So I think the global movement to isolate Israel will become ever stronger. There's another flotilla on its way to try and break the siege. Unfortunately, here in the UK, we have a problem that a lot of people hate Muslims so much that they support Israel because the likes of Tommy Robinson have convinced them that all Britain's problems stem from its Muslim population, and because the Palestinians are mostly, though not entirely Muslims, a lot of Christians amongst them, that's a parallel situation. Of course, they're absolutely nothing to do with each other. And the so-called patriotic right in Britain need to wake up to the fact that Israel is not their friend. And if they believe in indigenous rights like the rights of British people in Britain, then they should support the rights of Palestinians in Palestine. But I digress slightly. I think things like the flotilla and the growing BDS movement, and hopefully, finally, international institutions showing some backbone, will result to the growing isolation of Israel on the world stage. Where that leads, that's another matter, because that's very, very dangerous situation, because they are fanatics and they do have the Samson option. Worth remembering that in the spat with Iran, all our airwaves were filled with talk of how Iran must never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, but the biggest pyromaniac, the homicidal maniac in the region, Israel, of course, has its own undeclared nuclear weapons, and nobody ever talks about that. But that's just one instance of the asymmetry and fundamental mendacity of our media, Gareth.
Absolutely. Basil, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people, I know obviously 21st Century Wire, you do a lot of work for Patrick there, but where can people find you if they want to hear more from you?
Well, yeah, I've recently launched a new channel, News and Views, and in the future a lot more as well, because we want to feature comedy and music and all the good things about life that we should be focusing on. And that's unprecedented.tv. You can follow us there on X and unprecedented.tv on YouTube. And that was started by myself and former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik. At the moment, we're largely news and views, but we're going to expand into a much wider range of programming very soon. So keep your eyes and ears out for unprecedented.tv.
Sounds great. Patrick, thank you so much. And can you pass on as well to Lembit? Pass on my best to Lembit as well, because I love him to bits. Got a lot of time for him.
Very funny man.
He is, but he gets it as well. He knows what's going on, which is great for someone who's been in the corridors of perceived power, but speaks out about it. I think that's massively important. There's not enough of them, to be fair.
Great, yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we've got the most dreadful lot of people in the House of Commons at the moment. I mean, it's just sickening.
Haven't we just?
And there's no mechanism for getting rid of. A lot of people are sort of saying, "Oh, the Starmer government will fall." There's no mechanism for getting rid of them for another 4 years.
No, and there's no one waiting in the wings worth replacing them anyway. So looks like it's just down to us then, Basil. It's down to us, mate.
For the time being.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Taylor Hudak is an independent journalist and activist based in Budapest. Hudak specialises in covering topics such as human rights, free speech, press freedom, health law, corruption, and US foreign policy. She's here to talk about the imprisonment of Roger Ver. Roger was an early Bitcoin investor known as Bitcoin Jesus and is facing prosecution by the US authorities who allege he committed tax fraud after renouncing his US citizenship. Taylor, welcome to the show. Can you tell us a little bit about the case of Roger Ver? Because forgive me, I'm not amazingly aware of it.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me to speak about this case. It is so important, not only for Roger Ver himself, but for everybody, because of course, cases like this, similar to Assange, let's say Ross Ulbricht, and others, this really is to send a message to other people that if they are to speak out against government wrongdoing, that they too may become a target of the state. And that seems to be exactly what has been happening to Roger Ver. Just for a brief backstory on who he is, as you mentioned, he, of course, is a big promoter of Bitcoin, has been since the very early years around 2011, and was one of the first crypto investors in the world. When he was a young man, around 21 years old, he decided to get into politics as a libertarian. He spoke out against corruption of law enforcement in the intelligence agencies. And then since that point has really had several issues with the US government due to his speaking out and his strong stance in favor of freedom of transaction, human rights, civil liberties, and so much more. And again, he is just one example of many people who have been through the same predicament. But basically, this case is a tax-related case. So Ver is charged with 8 counts related to tax evasion, 3 counts of mail fraud for physically placing the alleged false tax documents in the mail, 2 counts of tax evasion, and then 3 counts of making fraudulent or false statements under penalties of perjury. And this actually dates back to 2014. So now it's been 11 years, but at the time that the case, or the indictment rather, was officially unsealed back in 2024, so just 1 year ago, it was 10 years, almost approaching the statute of limitations. So the U.S. government is seeking to imprison him potentially for 109 years. What? 90 of those years actually account for charges of mail fraud for just physically placing the documents in the mail. So he is awaiting potential extradition to the United States. He is residing, or not residing rather, but being held in Majorca on bail, which is a small island off the coast of Spain. He was arrested in Spain in April of last year. So this case is continuing to be litigated, and the next hearing in this case is scheduled for October 20th of this year.
I'm trying to get my head around that number of years, Taylor.
Right. And this is very... This is the hallmark of the U.S. Legal system. They stack on many charges. The person is facing a very, very lengthy prison sentence in order to coerce them to reach some sort of a plea agreement. That typically happens. It is unclear exactly why why he is facing so many years. It could be to send a message. It also could be that this has something to do with perhaps the U.S. Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, or something along those lines. I actually didn't get into that too much in this report. My report on this case is published in Solari, and it's focused specifically on the case, and as well as the expatriation process, because I forgot to mention earlier, in fact, this prosecution is in part related to Ver's exit tax calculation. So U.S. citizens who are seeking to leave the country permanently and not have to pay taxes, because the U.S. is very unique in that it has a citizenship-based taxation system, not residence-based. So if you are a U.S. citizen, no matter where you live in the world, for the most part, you have to report, file, and you may owe taxes, and you could be double taxed. And the only way to get out of that system and to no longer be under the radar of the IRS essentially is to expatriate and give up your U.S. citizenship. And the reason I mentioned the IRS just a moment ago is because, of course, the IRS has a long-standing history of investigating people who are critics of the state and the federal government. So the only way to get away from the system is to go through this lengthy, extensive expatriation process. And there's a disagreement between Ver and the U.S. government with regard to how much he owed on that exit tax calculation. Ver has always been open that he will pay whatever amount the U.S. government believes is owed. However, the U.S. government has really failed to tell him what he owes, and instead they decided to pursue a criminal case, which is quite abnormal. This is definitely a deviation from the typical procedure. If the U.S. government disagrees with your tax filing, they usually take that up with you before going to criminal proceedings. So there are many legal irregularities with this case as well.
So no pedophiles, drug traffickers, and murderers to catch. It's about people's tax returns. I didn't know that, Taylor, about the fact that, so if you say you're an American guy and you met a girlfriend, say in France, and you lived with your girlfriend for 5 years, you would have to pay tax in France to live, and you would pay tax in America as well. I had no idea. That's insane.
It is really insane. So it is extremely complicated. There are many various exceptions to these policies, but generally speaking, yes, Americans, because the U.S. government has a citizenship-based taxation system, if you're a U.S. citizen living abroad, generally speaking, you will have to report and you may owe tax. The only way out of this, as I said, is this expatriation process, which, by the way, interestingly, and I get into this in the report in great detail, you have to go through a two-part process, really. So you are having to relinquish citizenship for immigration purposes. But then in order to no longer have to pay tax in the United States, you also have to go through a separate process under the Internal Revenue Code, or IRC. So one may lose their U.S. passport. They may no longer be a citizen for immigration purposes in the United States. But speaking very generally here, until you receive a certificate of loss of nationality and you report to the U.S. government that you had lost your nationality, then you would be considered no longer taxable by the United States. So you're a citizen for immigration purposes, and then you're a citizen for taxation purposes. And again, all of these details, very fine details, are laid out in the report. It's really fascinating. I do believe this is very unique to the United States, and it does bring up bigger questions as to this idea that U.S. citizens really can't free themselves from this country. They can't really leave. And there's something, I think, in particular sinister about not being able to leave a country or fully cut ties with it. And that's exactly the type of system that we have in the United States.
I had no idea. Honestly, that's mad to me. What first got you involved in Roger's case? Is Roger someone that you were aware of before? And why do you think they're persecuting him in particular? Like, I know you said obviously they want to try and chuck all these things on, 5,000-year prison sentence, to try and get him to maybe, make a plea bargain. But why him in particular? Do you think it's for stuff he said, like, say, 10, 11 years ago?
It could be. It's a good question. I do not so much get into the why question. Right. As I mentioned briefly earlier, it could be related to this new strategic Bitcoin reserve. Perhaps they are looking to seize Bitcoin assets from an individual who has a lot of Bitcoin for this strategic reserve. I'm not too sure. Believe it or not, I'm actually not a crypto enthusiast, let's say. I'm not opposed to it, but I'm not also for it. I tend to cover a lot of legal cases. So I cover the case of Professor Dr. Suchat Bhakdi in Germany, when he was facing charges of anti-Semitism for criticizing the mRNA platform, and specifically the mRNA platform and the policies they implemented in Israel. And then I've also covered the Assange case as well. So I took this one on, looked through this case, laid it all out. And I think it should also be a lesson to everybody. Document everything, especially when it comes to your taxes or any sort of legal communications that you have. Roger Ver is so fortunate that he did have these communications from 2014, because they do, and the defense argues this, but I would also argue in favor of this as well, is that these communications do exonerate him of wrongdoing. However, of course, the U.S. government has conveniently withheld this information from the grand jury, it appears, and from the public, as it's not mentioned in the indictment, these exculpatory facts and communications. So this is really a lesson to everybody to document things and keep track of what you do, because it's really helped him in this case to have this information. And as I said, this is all laid out in the report.
Do you think that in general now, I mean, not even just America, but in general, like, lawfare is this sort of weapon of choice now? I'm just thinking, like, it's not just Roger. You've got people like, Rainer Fulmich in Germany, for instance, that actually, they used to call you names and say he's a far-right bigot or he's an anti-Semite or whatever. And that used to make a difference. And now people go, it doesn't mean anything anymore because everyone's everything, so it doesn't mean anything more. So then they go, okay, well, we can't destroy their character publicly because people don't care about names anymore. Let's just go for them using, legal or even illegal ways.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, these buzzwords that are used to attack people's character and basically attack their character in a public way. It's become meaningless because it's used so often. But this case also, in cases like it, like with the Assange case, also Bakhti's case, I just referenced these two because I covered those very closely. It also, instead of that person being able to engage in positive public discourse and help initiate positive change in the world, these individuals are unfortunately having to deal with a very serious legal case that sucks up all their time, their resources, and their energy. And one of the best anecdotes to this is, of course, transparency, and just to lay out all of the facts and show the holes in the U.S. government's case. And actually, when I worked on this report, I went into it. It's a very fact-based report. I let the reader come up with their own conclusions as to what exactly is going on here. But I laid it all out, shining a light on these fine details where you can see that the U.S. government is flat out deceptive. And of course, I knew that the U.S. government had a tendency to be deceptive on indictments. We saw that with the Assange case. And with this case, you see it as well. And it actually, disturbed me a little bit looking at it. It shouldn't surprise me, but it somewhat did, just the lengths that they went to conceal exculpatory evidence and communication. So I would encourage everybody to check it out for themselves. And as I had mentioned earlier, there is an even bigger story here, and that is the exit tax an infringement on one's fundamental right to expatriate from the United States? And that's currently being litigated in this case. The defense argues that the exit tax is unconstitutional for those reasons, but the U.S. government says there is no fundamental right to expatriate, that no American has a right to cut ties officially with the U.S. government, which is quite astounding in my opinion. And so, as I mentioned, this is currently being litigated. So there's a lot more to see with what's ahead. And unfortunately, other countries are starting to adopt a similar citizenship, or I wouldn't say citizenship-based taxation system, but they're adopting similar, more draconian taxation policies that you see in the United States. So while this is a very US-centric case, I think you may in the future see other countries follow suit with this more punitive tax system that exists in the US.
It's like an abusive relationship, isn't it? You're literally it's like you're locked in a metaphorical basement, like you can't get out. And I think it's interesting you say that, because I've noticed a lot over the years, like you'll see things happen in America, almost feels like a test bed really. And when they do something and they go, oh yeah, that's just horrific enough, great, let's export that to the rest of the world. In terms of Roger, this might sound like a weird question, but when you get a situation like this, same with Assange, people sort of forget about the human element. You've got a guy here who's facing a century in prison. How is he doing personally? Because I'm thinking now about myself. What would be going through my head if that's what I was up against?
Right. It's a reasonable question. And I would imagine that it's a difficult situation to be in. Of course, I cannot speak for him and how he's feeling. I am not sure exactly what he may be experiencing right now. But at one point, the official campaign was stating that, and this may still be the case, was that any moment he could be taken in by U.S. Marshals and then flown to the United States to face 109 years in prison. And so any moment could be his last moment of freedom. So that would definitely weigh on one's mental state. But fortunately for him, the U.S. government, in fact, did want him to be imprisoned. However, fortunately, the Spanish authorities ruled against the U.S. request to keep him incarcerated this entire time. So he is not in prison right now, which is fortunate because he would have been there for over a year already had he been kept in custody. So I'm sure it's very difficult, but I guess if people are interested to help familiarize yourself with the case, there's also a petition that you can sign on the freerogernow.org website. I hope that's the correct website, freerogernow.org. You could sign a petition, raise awareness. And as I mentioned, the next hearing is October 20th. But perhaps I should just backtrack briefly here and explain what this exit tax is, because I think it is something that is, I've mentioned it a few times, but maybe it's not clear to the listeners. And I'm actually going to pull this part up in the report just to make sure I get this correctly, because it can be a little bit confusing. So for the past 60 years in the United States, there has always been some sort of tax imposed on certain expatriating individuals. But then in June of 2008, the United States imposed an exit tax on covered expatriates. Covered expatriates are individuals who have a net worth of $2 million or more. If they have an average annual net income tax that is greater than $205,000, not income, but income tax, or if they fail to complete Form 8854, which is a form that you have to file when you are expatriating from the United States, declaring all of your assets, property, etc. So if you are a covered expatriate, as Ver was, because he had a net worth of greater than $2 million, then you have to conduct a hypothetical sale on all of your property the day before you expatriated for tax purposes. So one of the examples that I use in the article is that if one were to expatriate from the United States for tax purposes, not immigration purposes, remember there's a distinction here. So the day you expatriate for tax purposes, say that's April 29th, 2025, April 28th, 2025, you have to pretend that you sold all of your property and then pay a tax on the sale of that property. So the exit tax is an unrealized capital gains tax. So it's a tax on a sale that never happened, on gains that never occurred or were acquired. And so that is why this exit tax is just so controversial. And as I mentioned, that's actually being litigated right now. Is this a fair thing to implement on people who are seeking to expatriate from the United States? So if I go throughout the history of expatriation law, brief history of expatriation law in the United States, and you'll see, at least in my opinion, it seems very clear to me that over the years, they have made it more difficult to expatriate from the U.S. and cut ties with the country. So perhaps we could see it become even more difficult, but maybe this case could set a precedent here if these fine matters are going to be litigated eventually.
Yeah, it's like Hotel California. You are allowed to leave, but it's going to cost like 20% of your net worth just to leave. That's crazy. Taylor, where can people find you? Because you've mentioned a couple of times, obviously, your report on Roger. Where can they find that, and where can they keep up with what you're doing in terms of other investigations as well?
Yes. So this report is actually in the Solari report on Solari.com. The article is actually entitled "The Prosecution of Roger Ver, a Lawfare Case Study." So you can find that there. I am also a contributor to The Last American Vagabond. I also did some work for Children's Health Defense Europe. However, it's no longer a running organization at this time. But that's where you can find my work. I'm also active on Twitter at _Taylor Hudak, or X rather. And I am even more active actually on Telegram at Taylor Hudak Media.
Magic. Taylor, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I'm still trying to get my head around over a century in prison for tax. That's just insane. At the same time, we're not allowed to know who's on the Epstein client list, but this is the world we live in. But thank you, Taylor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed last week's double episode of Bring the Fire with Callum Smiles and Kate Shimarani. If you haven't watched the episodes, they are live on Iconic now. This coming Sunday, I'm joined by Robert Jensen. Robert is a Dutch television presenter and talk show host who was a household name in the Netherlands before speaking out against the government during the pandemic, which, as we know, gets the mainstream up in arms against you. The episode goes live at 10 a.m. on Sunday at iconic.com. Until then, have a great week and take care of yourselves. Good night.